Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on the Business Opportunity Analyser 2.0. My name is Caroline Paul. I am Project Officer Hydrogen at Agora Industry, and I'm your moderator today. So what is awaiting you in the next 1.5 hours? We are starting with a presentation by my colleague Emir to set the scene and give you the background information. Second of all, we'll have a presentation from our colleague from Öko Institut, who will present to you the technicalities and really how the Business Opportunity Analyser functions. And he will also give you kind of a tour through the tool so you can see it in action there. And I'm very excited also that we have two commentators today joining us from South Africa and Argentina, who will present their perspectives on the Business Opportunity Analyser, but also on the broader discussion of renewable molecule production in their countries right after our presentations. After the commentary, we will have time for the Q&A session from the audience. So this is really where we can pick up your questions to the speakers, to the panelists, and then we will hear some closing remarks at the end. So with this, I would like to introduce to you my colleague Emir Çolak, our first presenter of today, to come on the stage. Emir is a project officer hydrogen at Agora Industry, and he has accompanied the development of the Business Opportunity Analyser from the very beginning. He will now present to you the narrative, but also the system boundaries of the tool and give you the necessary background information. Emir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Caro, for the introduction. Let me share my screen. I hope it works for everyone. Yes, and good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. For the ones in the European time zone, I hope everyone is ready for the Business Opportunity Analyser version 2.0. So let's get into it. So before I start, I would like to express some few words on Agora Industry for the newcomers. We are a think tank under the Agora Think Tanks network, and our goal is to develop scientifically sound and politically feasible strategies for a successful pathway to a climate-neutral industry. We are not just based in Berlin, but we have also offices in Brussels, Beijing, and Bangkok. And I would also like to briefly introduce the PtX Hub, which is a knowledge and exchange platform to accelerate the market development of sustainable power-to-X on a global scale. And as Agora, we are involved in different projects with PtX Hub, and the Business Opportunity Analyser is one of them. We do aim to contribute to the discussion on the priorities and the next steps that are part of the decision-making process in order to maximize the local benefits of scaling up renewable hydrogen and PtX economy in the partner countries. So I would like to start with some context setting for the tool. Our previous publications on molecules and hydrogen highlights that direct electrification not only ensures the most efficient use of electrons, but driven by its efficiency, is also often the most cost-effective pathway to decarbonize various sectors. On the other hand, on the other side, for a variety of different reasons, many energy-intensive production processes cannot be easily directly electrified, in which hydrogen and its derivatives and downstream products come into play, which makes them a vital component to decarbonize those hard to electrify sectors. And given the inherent energy losses associated with the production of renewable hydrogen, the production of these molecules and downstream associated products, such as green steel, will require vast amounts of renewable-based power. And this creates a potential for renewable-rich regions to attract energy-intensive parts of the decarbonized industrial value chains. And this is where our tool actually comes in to provide pre-feasibility information to support potential exporting countries. Anticipating the opportunities that market forces can provide will be key to adequately prepare for the transition to carbon neutrality in both the global north and the south. Some of you may know, we have published the first version of the tool last year, and today we are very glad to present you the updated version of our tool. And the updated version comes in a web app format with some enhanced cost calculations. We have implemented the optimization methodology, as the cost-effective capacities of individual system components are highly dependent on specific renewable energy feed-in profiles. But hang in there, Markus will give us a deep dive on the next version after the presentation. And in order to correctly interpret the results in our tool, we would have to consider the different levels of assessing hydrogen costs. The high-level guidance for policymakers is typically based on simplified levelized cost estimates, which sometimes have their own limitations. And such high-level guidance tends to underestimate the real-world project implementation costs, and we think that it should be clear about its limitations. The realized project costs will rely on commercial data and may include a range of further cost components that typically not covered by the cost calculation tools, including our Business Opportunity Analyser. So the project-specific infrastructure requirements, taxes, and royalties are just some of them, and these components will increase the final cost of the molecules. On the other hand, with a higher level of analysis at this pre-feasibility level, we were also able to obtain a higher level of cost comparison among producing countries purely focused on techno-economics. This may be difficult to perform with real costs, as each project will have different local context, and which will make them more difficult to compare. And this slide shows you the different examples for procuring renewable electricity for producing hydrogen. In the light of recent hydrogen auctions, it is important to note that hydrogen costs can also be influenced by the way how the renewable energy is procured. The option A on the left-hand side shows the case when the electrolyzers are directly connected to the renewables. And this is also the business case on which we base our calculations in the tool. In the option B, additional electricity is produced, and this can be used by other consumers via grid connection. And the option C over here shows the business model where electrolyzers are directly connected to the grid through a direct connection to the grid can potentially offer a secured power supply. And in the high demand power markets, this may add an opportunity cost for the electricity that makes hydrogen production more expensive. And in particular, where project developers have the option to sell this electricity to the grid instead. Therefore, the actual price of hydrogen on the market will likely be higher than the production costs that we estimate, and mostly depend on the supply and demand dynamics of different markets. And with this slide, I would like to conclude my presentation, and you could see our latest publications on hydrogen over here. And please expect more to come. And I am very much looking forward to our panel discussion with our guests, and looking forward to the Markus introduction. And thank you very much for listening, and handing over back to you, Carol.
Thank you, Emir, for showing us this context information on the Business Opportunity Analyser. And as said before, we are now handing over to Markus Haller, because by now you will probably want to see what it actually looks like. So Markus, could you please come on the screen? Markus is a senior researcher, energy and climate, and he has co-led the development of the Business Opportunity Analyser in the last years. He is working at Öko Institut, our project partner, and he will now give you the introduction to the updated version. Markus, over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm glad for the opportunity of sharing our tool with you. I will walk you through the app and give you an overview of its features. So I'll just share my screen. Right. I hope that this is working for everyone. So if you start the app, it looks like this. You have a navigation pane where you can switch between different tabs. For starters, the most important are the info tab that you are seeing right now, which contains a quick guide and some information on scope and methodology, and the costs tab, which contains the main results. And on the left-hand side, you have a sidebar, which you can resize or even close if you're working on a small screen, but we will leave it open now. And the sidebar lets you choose settings that determine the kind of results that you're about to see. Okay, and now let's calculate some costs. So what you can choose is the supply country and the demand country where you would like to deliver your molecules to, and the product that you would like to produce, and the electrolyzer type that you would like to use. In this case, we are producing in Australia. We are supplying molecules to Germany, and we are producing hydrogen using the AEL electrolyzer technology. You can choose between different renewable electricity sources. In this case, it's PV. This is only valid for the supply region that you chose. For the other countries, wind PV hybrid sites are used to ensure a fair comparison. And lastly, you can select one of 6 predefined data scenarios that cover the years 2030 and 40, and high, medium, or low cost assumptions for each one. There are some additional settings, but we will skip them for now. Okay, after you made your choice of settings, you can start inspecting the results. And right on top, you see a world map that shows the regional distribution of costs for producing, in this case, hydrogen and delivering it to Germany. Each marker represents a supply country, and the supply country that you chose is highlighted, and you can move your mouse over the markers to get some additional information, a breakdown of costs by component. If you scroll down, you get a box plot that visualizes the distribution of costs and a breakdown by component for the supply country that you chose. In this case, you see that Australia is rather on the high cost range, and the highest cost component, the largest cost component, is transportation, which is not surprising given the large distance between Germany and Australia. If you scroll further down, you get a bar plot that lets you compare cost breakdowns by category for different supply regions. By default, all regions are shown and they are sorted by total cost. You can see Australia sits right here. And you can also see that the countries with lower costs are mostly those that are closer to Germany and where pipeline transport is available. So green bars denote transportation costs by ship, and violet purple bars by pipeline. Pipeline transport is considered feasible for hydrogen and methane if the distances are below 6,000 kilometers. Now we can try to switch the product from hydrogen to something that's easier to transport across large differences. For example, ammonia. And we see that this makes Australia much more competitive. So this figure is, like all figures in the app, interactive, which means you can move your mouse over a component to get more information. You can also zoom in and out again. You can switch legend entries on and off, even isolate some legend entries. And you can switch to a full screen display. You can also download the image as a PNG file. You can also use the filter controls if you want to look at a smaller number of countries, for example, to get a closer comparison of Australia and, let's say, Morocco, you can choose them, and then you can see clearly that in the case of producing ammonia and delivering it to Germany, Australia has lower costs compared with Morocco. If you would switch back to hydrogen, it would be the other way around. I switch back to displaying all countries. Below the figure, as in all or most figures in the app, you get the data available in a tabular format, which you can also sort, and you can download the data in an Excel format if you like. If you scroll further down, you get more graphics that follow the same structure and that let you compare the data along different parameters. This graph lets you compare costs by data scenario. The following graph lets you compare costs by electricity source. We consider 4 different sources: photovoltaics, PV, wind onshore, wind offshore, and wind PV hybrid sites. In this case, the wind PV hybrid site has slightly lower costs than the PV only site. So we could switch to this one. And the last graph lets you compare costs by product and by electrolyzer type. So by default, it shows all the products that can be selected in the app and the electrolyzer type that is selected in the sidebar. In this case, ammonia indeed is the cheapest option. Okay, this covered the main cost comparison results of the tool. Now let me walk you through the remaining tabs. The market scanning tab gives you another way of evaluating the competitive position of your country. The first graph shows your country and all other supply countries sorted by transportation distance to the demand country, to the selected demand country, and by total costs. The markers are scaled with the technical potential of renewable electricity generation. We know that these estimates are tricky and need to be treated with caution, but to give you a rough estimate of the potential market power of the supply countries, we added 2 of these sources, which you can use to scale the markers. Or you can just leave the scaling off if you prefer it. In the next graph, we show you demand countries covered by the app, ordered by shipping distance or transportation distance on the x-axis, and projected hydrogen demand in 2030 on the y-axis if such data is available. As always, you get the complete data in tabular format below. I'll move to the next tab. So basically, the app works on a country level, but for 3 countries, for Argentina, Morocco, and South Africa, we collected data on full load hours of renewables for sub-regions, and you can inspect the data and the resulting regional distribution of costs in this tab. So it looks similar to the costs tab that I already showed you. You get a map representation of total costs per sub-region. You get a cost breakdown by region, by component for all regions. And below, you get another map and a box plot that visualizes the distribution of full load hours of renewables. And we move on to the optimization tab. So this is the main methodological improvement compared to the last version of the tool. We now use an optimization model to determine the capacities and the full load hours of generators, of electrolyzers, derivative production, and storage. This model minimizes total costs and calculates the capacities and the hourly dispatch. not for a complete year, but for 8 representative weeks in an hourly resolution. And this tab shows some results of these calculations for the selected settings in the sidebar. The results have all been pre-calculated, so unless you modify the input data, there will be no delay when you switch settings. Now, this figure shows output profiles for electricity generation, PV and wind in this case, for the electrolyzer, for derivative production, as well as electricity and hydrogen storage. And if you scroll down, you get an overview of the parameters of the optimized systems. In this table, you can see the installed capacities and the annual output for each component, the realized full load hours for renewable generators and the electrolyzer, the curtailment of renewables, and the total cost per megawatt hour of final product. We use the PipeSAR modeling framework to run the optimization. You can download the PipeSAR model in that CDF format if you really want to dive into the details, or if you want to use it as a basis for your own modeling exercises. Okay. The next tab shows you all the data that goes into the calculations. It lets you inspect the data and to some extent also modify it. First, you get an overview of data that is region specific. And this is, in this tool, the capital expenditure for renewables, the full load hours of renewables, and the weighted average cost of capital. You get a map representation of one parameter that you can choose. You get the data table below, and a box plot. Where is it? That visualizes the distribution of the parameters across regions. In this case, it's the capital expenditure for renewables. Below, you get an area where all the global data, where there is no distinction between different regions, is displayed. For example, clicking on one of these expanders shows you the capital expenditure, the operational expenditure, efficiencies, and lifetime for all processes that are related to transportation, compression, liquefaction, and reconversion. As always, you can download the table as Excel if you like. Okay, so if you're unhappy about some of the input data and want to change it, you can do so. Let's, for example, look at the cost of capital. If we look at the map, you can see that there are significant regional differences. If we look at the data table, we can see that the highest values are for Argentina and Ukraine. And if we want to change, for example, the weighted average cost of capital for Argentina, we can activate the edit input data switch at the bottom of the sidebar. And now I can enter a new data point directly into the table. Now I change significantly lower values so that we can really see some differences in the results. If we reduce the WACC to 10%, we click on the Register Changes button. And if we move to another tab, these changes will affect the results. So we move to the Costs tab and scroll down to one of the bars that does compare costs per country. And now we have a notification that tells us you have modified the input data. And now I can choose if I want to see the costs, including the modifications or without the modifications, or I would like to see the difference. So I just select Argentina as a supply country so that you can see the marker. So with modifications, it is here. Without modifications, costs are significantly higher. And these are the cost differences between the two scenarios. If we scroll to the top, we get an overview of all the data modifications that we made. We can download this data if we want to preserve it for a later session, or we can upload files that contain changes from a previous session. And if we want to reset everything to default values, we just switch off the editing mode, and then we are back to default values. Okay, now I showed you how you can use the app to calculate costs, and there is still more to it, because the app also contains a lot of contextual information that you might find useful. The country fact sheet contains information on the selected demand country and supply country. For example, for each demand region, you get information on the projected hydrogen demand, information on national hydrogen strategies, hydrogen trade characteristics, and existing or planned infrastructure projects. And all information comes with links to sources, studies, and official documents. The certification schemes tab contains information on certification, regulation, and standards that are relevant in the different demand countries. You can select a scheme and get information on its characteristics, on the scope. And again, you get some links and associated studies for further reading. And the sustainability tab gives you information on sustainability issues that should be considered when producing hydrogen or derived molecules. For example, environmental guardrails that should be taken into account when sourcing carbon. You can find them here. I won't go into details now. I would just like you to know that the app offers a lot of contextual information that we hope you find useful. And lastly, you get a list of all the literature that has been used and links to the respective documents if they are available online. And this concludes the introduction to the app. Thank you for taking your time. And I will give the microphone back to Caro, and I'm looking forward for your questions and feedback.
Thank you very much, Markus. It's always nice to see this very hands-on demonstration of the Business Opportunity Analyser in live. Markus has not answered all of your questions. Please questions into the Q&A box if there's any left on your minds. And now I would like to move on to the discussion part of this webinar and welcome our two commentators on our stage. Rebecca and Micaela, could you please turn on your videos? Yes. Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you, Micaela. It's really great to have two experts here on the stage who can also reflect on the Business Opportunity Analyser in your national contexts. And this is basically what we want to do now. But before we start the commentary, let me please introduce to you Micaela Carlino. Micaela is an international consultant and researcher at Fundación Torcuato di Tella, a nonprofit focused on climate change and energy transition topics. Micaela has over 20 years of experience in technical advice to governments, private companies, and national development banks. She has identified and designed policies and evaluated potential of mitigation and adaptation investments. Micaela, welcome to the panel. And our second commentator today is Rebecca Maserumule. Rebecca is Chief Science and Technology Representative at the National Department of Science and Innovation in South Africa. There she works on international partnerships and she supports the implementation of the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, amongst other things. She's also the chairperson of IPHE, the International Partnership for Hydrogen and Fuel Cells. In case you are not familiar with IPHE, it's an intergovernmental partnership of countries whose mission it is to facilitate and accelerate the transition to clean energy and mobility systems. Rebecca, also warm welcome to you on our panel. And after having introduced the two of you, I would like to start asking Micaela and invite you to give your feedback basically on the Business Opportunity Analyser, but also put it a little bit into the context of the discussion of molecule production in Argentina. Is there anything you see, like sensitivities you see that need to be considered when producing hydrogen for domestic uses, but also versus exports from your specific country perspective of Argentina?
Thank you, Carol. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Thanks for this kind invitation to participate in this webinar. First of all, I want to congratulate on the launch of this latest version of the Business Opportunity Analyser. I want to congratulate on the tool. We were highly impressed on the tool. We were impressed in terms of the ease of use and the friendliness on the tool. We in Fundación Torcuato y Tella, we are part of the consortium of the PtX hub in Argentina. And within the activities, we elaborated a study of the potential barriers to the development of green hydrogen and its entire value chain, as well as on financing strategies to address and help to remove the barriers. And in this context is that we had the opportunity to use the tool. Regarding your question, to give some context of the country, Argentina was a pioneer country in promoting hydrogen. We had a law in 2006 focusing on the production, use, and applications as a fuel and energy vector. But now we have the opportunity to consolidate the value chain of green hydrogen to create an upgrade in terms of national reindustrialization, driving the energy transition, and also creating new business opportunities for local companies supplying goods and services to the entire value chain, and also attracting massive new foreign investments. The northwest of Argentina, based on solar energy, and the southern region of Argentina, largely wind energy, would potentially be among the regions within the lowest production costs in the world before considering costs. However, as Markus showed a while before, Argentina's high cost of capital undermines its competitive potential as a global supplier of green hydrogen. So we see that Argentina could find greater competitive advantages in focusing on more industrialized products such as ammonia, with greater efficiencies in transportation and in the development of the domestic and regional fertilizer markets. Also, the development of green hydrogen and derivatives in Argentina raises some synergies related to the concepts of flexibility and optionality, because promotes the development of infrastructure that is needed in the country, such as electric transportation networks linked to the development of renewable energy capacity, pipeline infrastructure with duality with natural gas infrastructure that we have in Argentina, and also hydrogen reconversion, and port infrastructure required for export green hydrogen derivatives. Also, it's important to think that the expected development of the green hydrogen value chain should be conceived as a national endeavor with multiple objectives, and not only as an export capacity only. For this, we need to think that the development of the entire value chain has different dimensions, and also leads to the involvement of different actors of the economy, including the state, private enterprises, commercial banks, development banks, investors, medium and small scale firms, as well as the scientific and technological sector. So the capacities to be built are capital intensive, and thus requiring innovative financing models, given that access to low-cost financing is a critical factor to reduce those costs that are high in Argentina, in order to facilitate the introduction of competitive technologies. The establishment of innovative regulatory framework also are necessary to facilitate the foreign direct investment, and also to develop early strategic alliances with relevant actors at the global level. Also can contribute to remove barriers for the development of the entire value chain in Argentina, in order to remove the high cost of financing. Finally, I must note that we have to consider that the development of the green hydrogen entire value chain in Argentina could be converted into an outstanding mitigation action in terms of addressing climate change, and also a key transformation vector for the energy and industrial sector. So we need to think it as a transformational vector in the long term, and not only in terms of the specific hydrogen value chain. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Micaela, for your insights from Argentina. I would like to ask you now, Rebecca. I know you played around with the tool beforehand as well, and it'd be great to get some feedback from you, some takeaways. What did you find interesting? But also, if you want to, similar to Micaela, if you want to put it a little bit into the broader discussion in South Africa. We know that many countries in the global south, like South Africa, are totally richly endowed with renewable energy resources, but they really struggle with basic access to energy and water, for example. So it'd be great to have you also elaborate a little bit on the context of molecule production in South Africa, and on the opportunities and the challenges that you see related to hydrogen development in your country.
No, thank you so much. I did get the honor to play around with the tool, and I must say I was impressed. Whenever I would think about needing something, it would just be there. So, for instance, when you're just showcasing the links to policies that you can find online, so it was just nice to have almost like a one-stop shop for information. And I think maybe what was really compelling and really powerful about this tool is the fact that it allows you to compare. So the accuracy in the numbers for me isn't necessarily the most important aspect. Is how do you compare different countries? How do you compare different situations? And I think, like Micaela, when I saw the presentation and I saw that how the weighted average cost of capital can have a huge implications for your, for how competitive your hydrogen or your product is, I think that is information that stakeholders in government as well as financiers need to see to understand the implications of certain levers to improve your competitiveness as a country. I think if you look at South Africa in general, our strategy, we actually had strategies on hydrogen as far back as 2008. Granted, it was based on the research, development, innovation, and then hydrogen really took off in 2021 with the launch of the Hydrogen Society Roadmap, and then subsequently we've had two policies. We've had the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan for South Africa, which focuses on hydrogen as one of the legs, and then recently the Green Hydrogen Commercialization Strategy. And that strategy for South Africa looks at both domestic consumption of green hydrogen as well as export. So hydrogen is seen as a very key enabler for decarbonization of hard-to-abate sectors. But one of the challenges I would say we have in South Africa is wherever you go, there's sunshine. You go to the Northern Cape, Western Cape, KZN, Limpopo province, there is sunshine. So I think the deep dive that was done for South Africa, as well as Argentina and Morocco, is of value, especially if you're looking to trade green hydrogen or green ammonia within your country. Because I think infrastructure, which is one of the biggest barriers to the rollout of hydrogen fuel cell vehicles and other technologies, is going to be, issues of infrastructure is going to be one of the huge issues. So understanding what your demand is, understanding where it's the cheapest within your country, and then understanding the infrastructure that could enable the domestic consumption of green hydrogen, green ammonia, for me is actually was very powerful for me when I was, looking at that. And then I think just looking at understanding what your costs are and understanding if it's logistics versus the cost of your renewables or your capex, where most of your costs lie, so that you can actually come up with interventions that make sense, that are common sense. And I think what's also really of importance is the fact that, we're talking about a lot of these projects are being, mentioned, but, we don't really have large projects on the ground. We actually have information. And I think for me, the value of this tool is really to give you a baseline of what those costs are. And then I think over time, as the tool is updated, so, say we're talking about, 2.0, but I would hope that 3.0, 4.0, 5.0 are going to come, because the value in the update, looking at the baseline, how we progressed, and then even as internationally, are we in the right direction? Are we seeing costs reducing? Are we doing the correct research and development to bring the cost down, so that we can actually make sure that the barriers to the large spread, use of hydrogen across all sectors is enabled? And I think last but not least, when it comes to communication between different, I'll say, species or different types of people. So you have your economists who want to have a certain language. You have your scientists, you have your engineers, your government officials. I think the tool is actually, for me, is a way of helping to translate, unfortunately, the engineers talking to the economists talking to government people. And I think that in itself is real value add. It's enabling the translation of information from one group of people to another. And I think that translation will allow, again, the large scale penetration of hydrogen or green hydrogen projects globally. So thank you so much. And, really congratulations to the team, Agora, great job, and so forth. And looking forward to using 2.0 and looking forward to 3.0 of this tool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for putting it also into kind of a new light as kind of a communication enabler between different kinds of stakeholders. It's really great to hear that also from your perspective. Let's move on to the Q&A session now. And I would like to invite Emir and Markus back to the panel, and also Rebecca, exactly. And also invite once again the audience. Also, if you have specific questions to Rebecca or Micaela, then you can also note this down in the Q&A box, and we will try to put them on the podium. Let's start with a question. There have been a few questions coming in, starting with a question to Markus. Somebody was interested in the list of products that is available in addition to hydrogen. So basically, what other products does the Business Opportunity Analyser show? And especially, what about including DME? And if you could also elaborate what DME stands for, that would also be great.
DME, dimethyl ester. I can just list the products that we took into account. So obviously it's hydrogen, it's methane, methanol, and ammonia, LOHC, and e-fuels, and green iron. So these are the products that we implemented in the tool right now. DME is not part of the list. But yeah, maybe we will put it on the list for the version 3.0.
We can take a note of that. Great. Moving on to a question to Emir. What are the assumptions for CO2 costs that are included in the tool?
Yes, I think it's also nice to address this question into a bigger audience rather than putting in the chat. So the user will be able to choose between the direct air capture, often referred to as DAC, and also the point source carbon supply. And we came up with these values with some an extensive literature research. And this literature research will be also available in the website after the webinar. So you can also check the documentation. You can also check about our other assumptions for the calculations in this document. So yeah, I think that's answered the question.
Thank you so much, Emir. There is one question addressed to Micaela, and it's about, again, the challenges of that you mentioned also before, financing and the infrastructure challenges with regards to growing enough renewable energy, but also hydrogen production in your country. How does that impact basically the growth of RE and hydrogen in Argentina?
Well, we have right now a very complex context in Argentina. We have a recent change of government with a very different policy perspective in terms of energy and macroeconomic view. And the main objective of the government right now is to accommodate things in terms of poverty, inflation, and macroeconomic disbalances, but we need infrastructure to continue growing. So we need infrastructure in terms of energy, and having green hydrogen as a possibility to address climate change and to export and have a new entire value chain could be a possibility to develop infrastructure that also gives electricity to that satisfies the energy needs of the population in general. So we have this, in our view, the hydrogen development could also help in terms of developing infrastructure, even though in the long term the financing needs to develop the value chain of hydrogen isn't achieved at the scale that could be in order to export ammonia or synthetic fertilizers.
Thank you so much, Micaela. A little bit into a similar direction, Rebecca, the question on how does the transition to a renewable hydrogen economy contribute to value creation and a just energy transition in your country in particular?
Well, I think, like I said, when the Just Energy Transition investment plan of South Africa has three main pillars. The first pillar is renewable power, retiring the coal fleet. The second pillar is electric vehicles, and the third pillar is hydrogen or green hydrogen. And the way we're doing that in South Africa is each of those three pillars will have what we call a skills development zone. Located, the one that's located for renewable power is actually located in Mpumalanga, which is where a lot of our coal belt is. So that's what we call the, I would say, ground zero for the just transition in South Africa, because you're going to see a lot of jobs lost in the transition period. So we're dealing with that with skills, but also with green hydrogen. There's quite a few projects in green hydrogen which are actually being implemented in Mpumalanga, where we call ground zero. So I think those projects will allow the country to transition with jobs, but also if you look at the domestic demand for hydrogen, it's going to be in green steel in the Saldanha Bay special economic zone, but also they're looking at capturing CO2 from coal-fired power plants and using green ammonia for either e-fuels and so forth. So there's quite a few research and development initiative and innovation projects that we're doing, one jointly with Germany around capturing carbon from coal-fired power plants and using green hydrogen, to create what we call carbon lean products. So I think that if we can get the cost of hydrogen down enough, then you'll actually be able to use it to get value-added products for export use as well as for domestic use.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that again. Another question to Markus. This one is on CBAM, so basically on the effects of CBAM, for example, for subsidies of renewable energy. Did your calculations consider these implications of CBAM for imports into Europe?
CBAM, so that's the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which means that you need to pay a certain type of taxes if you import a product into the EU, where emissions have been produced during production of this good. And no, we didn't consider this. The tool doesn't consider taxes or subsidies at all, at least not explicitly, but you can sort of take account for them by modifying cost input parameters. So, for example, you can take account for a policy that reduces the cost of capital by reducing the weighted average cost of capital. input parameters.
Thank you. There is another question in the Q&A on the selection of the countries. As we've seen, not all countries are considered in the tool. So basically, what was the basis for the selection of countries in the tool, and how many are considered in total? This would go to Emir.
Yeah, maybe I can take that. So at the beginning of the project, this was back in 2020, we screened potential future export and import countries and agreed with our partners, with PtX Hub, on a final list of countries to be integrated. And why these 3 deep dive countries, our grant from the PtX Hub has this special focus on South Africa, Morocco, and Argentina. And for the total number of countries, if I'm not mistaken, there should be 39 different supply countries and 9 different demand countries in the tool.
Quite a number already. There's a short question directed to Markus. It's on the coding, basically. And the participant is asking if the tool is open source.
Yes, it is. So the source code is available on GitHub. And in fact, we are happy if you file any feature requests or ideas or bug reports there, or if you would like to contribute, we would be even more happy. And the code is licensed under the Creative Commons license, CC BY, as well as the data, which means that as long as you cite it properly, you can use it.
Thanks. So basically an invitation to all the IT nerds who would like to take a look at codes. There is another question from a participant who's interested in the units of the tools and whether it is possible to change between different units, or are they fixed? And I would direct it to Emir if you want to answer this one.
Yes, if Markus lets me to answer. So we have $1 per tons, and the other option is to use dollar per megawatt hours. So the user is able to change between those two, and that's the 2 way to go.
Thank you. Another technical question on storage. I'm gonna read this out now, directed to Markus. So it's whether you include storage to buffer the intermittency effect of renewables, and in case you do so, what's the assumption behind the cost of the battery storage?
Yes, we take 2 types of storage into account, batteries for storing electricity and tanks for storing hydrogen. Yeah, for the detailed parameterization, I would encourage you to take a look at the data documentation where we have documented all of this. It's the source for the costs of batteries and hydrogen storage is a publication by the Danish Energy Agency.
Thank you. We continue a little bit with some aspects of sustainability, and the next question is basically on the water dimension, so the water requirements. And the participant is asking if the app, if the Business Opportunity Analyser takes water requirements into account, since water scarcity is an important issue for many potential production countries. And maybe we can elaborate on this question first from Markus, but also Rebecca, Micaela, if you want to say a few words on your context of water, that would also be interesting to hear for the audience for sure. Maybe starting with Markus.
Yes, the app does take water requirement into account. there are two ways of doing this. You can either apply a specific water price, or you can choose to use a water desalination plant that provides the water, in which case the capital expenditure and the electricity demand of the plant are taken into account.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe passing this topic over to our commentators from South Africa. Rebecca, do you think what's it going to be like? What's the water topic like in South Africa? Is this very relevant in your context?
Yeah, I mean, South Africa is a water scarce country. Even a couple of years ago, Cape Town had challenges with, water, like serious challenges. So in terms of the hydrogen economy in South Africa, water is at the top of our, is really at the top of the list when it comes to discussions. Our Water Research Council in South Africa is actually establishing a water research program around hydrogen to deal with that issue. But also, I think in terms of South Africa, when due to desalination, that's why provinces very close to the coastline, your Western Cape, Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, are probably going to be early adopters of green hydrogen because they're near their coast, they can desalinate. And in South Africa, we do have very small desalination plants, but mostly for, I think, salt production. But in terms of whether or not we have regulations in place to ensure that it's done sustainably, that's another question. And that's something that is under development currently.
Thank you so much. Just passing this also on to Micaela.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, very similarly to South Africa, in the regions where we have availability of wind energy or solar energy, there's water shortage. So there's a constraint in terms of wet water availability, and we need to think it in a sustainable way in order to ensure that the hydrogen value chain is sustainable as a whole.
Yeah, thank you, Micaela. There is 2 remaining questions. Somebody is using the Excel version of the tool, so basically the Business Opportunity Analyser 1.0, and they are asking if it can be expected that the results from this older version are going to be very different from this new version, and why. This would be a question to Markus, exactly.
I'm glad that you're using the old version of the tool. And yes, the results will be different. There are a couple of reasons for that. We have updated the input data, especially the capital expenditure and cost of capital data. Also, in the previous tool, costs were represented in 2021 US dollars, and now the base year is 2023. So this will result in cost increase. And of course, there have also been methodological changes. Most notably, we use different full load hour profiles for renewables now, and we use an optimization model to determine the capacities of processes inside the system. So this will result in changes to the results here, right?
Thank you so much, Markus. And I would like to wrap up this Q&A session with a last question addressed to Emir. Basically, what are the next steps of the project? Is there going to be another update, or what can we expect?
Hopefully. So we will be looking forward to the suggestions and feedbacks from our users, which will immensely help us for preparing the future of the tool. I guess we will be presenting the tool in different forums in the upcoming months, so I would expect some feedback also from them. And currently, we are also discussing and thinking on how to develop the BOA further. And this could be including some greenhouse gas emission calculations. So the future will unfold. And yeah, I think I can summarize it in this way.
Thank you so much, Emir. And with this, I would like to round off this Q&A session. Thank you for all your interesting questions and for answering those as well from the panelists. Before coming to an end, I'd like to hand over to Matthias Deutsch, who is heading our hydrogen program at Agora Industry, for some remaining comments and for a last statement.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Let me first thank our panelists today for their perspectives on the BOA, but also Caro for the great moderation. Then Öko Institut for making a really great product even better, I believe. And also thank you very much to Emir for driving this on our side at Agora together with other hydrogen and data experts. And finally, the PtX Hub, under whose umbrella this has been made possible. And this was around, or even more than 140 people today. So I think there is some interest in this topic. And we could hear questions around system boundaries and different molecules covered, and even suggestions for what we should include in the future in the BOA. So thank you very much all for also bringing in your thoughts on how we can further improve the product. And I think we also showed how this contextual information on sustainability is to be kept in mind when thinking about this future of production around the globe and imports and exports. And what I think was helpful to also understand from Micaela's and Rebecca's perspective, what is it where the BOA can actually be of help and value, how those new investments are being considered in your countries, how much in the end, ideally, those PtX products can act as transformational vectors. It's not only hydrogen, it's a longer value chain. In the end, also with the ambition to develop new infrastructure for the population in general. This is not only about pushing for exports. And I think we also heard about this idea that there is the hope that from a just energy transition perspective, that once we get into this build out, that in the end, hydrogen and PtX cost will further come down, which should then allow also domestic use, where in the early steps, maybe domestic use is not as easy as we would sometimes hope for, but it's still costly. And this is where we want to make a contribution for those first steps. And I also learned that if we consider this to be a one-stop shop, that's great. It's about country comparisons and this contextual sustainability information where we hope to make a contribution. And with that, let me finally say at Agora, we do care about the entire energy transition. And that means both electrons, quite a lot of electrons, and molecules. And today we talked a lot about molecules, but to not forget that there's especially one interesting field where molecules and electrons are under, let's say, heavy debate. It's high temperature industrial heat. And here I encourage you to also look into a recent publication on direct electrification of industrial process heat that colleagues of us have just published a few weeks ago. This should be an inspiration to always ask, where do we absolutely need molecules, but maybe electrons could do the job as well. And with that spirit, thanks again for joining us today, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you so much for rounding this up with putting the electrons on the spotlight as well, Matthias. So what's left to do? I'd like to thank the audience for participating in such high numbers. It was great to see so many people interested in the topic, and for posing all those very interesting questions to the panel. Thank you a lot also to our panelists, especially to Rebecca and Micaela, for bringing in your country perspectives. It's great to really see this discussion also going on and have your voice in this webinar as well. Thanks to the presenters, Emir and Markus, and to everybody behind the scenes. So also to Grace Williams and Christopher Heinemann, who are not visible right now, but worked a lot for this.